Hey guys, here we are. So, special edition Music Expo. It's catching a lot of people by surprise. So, hopefully, you will catch us live or on replay. But my name is. Hey guys, here we are. So, Loic Maestracci, and was just checking that it works, and it's working. So, that's great. My name is Loic Maestracci, the founder of Music Expo, and I'm actually very excited about today. As some of you know, last Friday we were supposed to have Liam Shai do a live performance, and we had some technical difficulties, which always come with doing live performance remotely and live streaming. And Liam basically offered to redo it, and so we're having an extra bonus session here. And we decided also to extend from 1 hour, or what would have been 50 minutes with him, to an hour and a half, which will be an hour of performance, and then 30 minutes of Q&A. So I'm on the screen right now. He was with me. He's dialing back in. I'm going to have Liam back here with me. Liam, how are you?
I'm doing great, thanks. How are you? Can you guys hear me?
Can I get a one if you can hear Liam? And I see some folks. I see Bobby, who's already. Hi, Bobby. Thanks for joining us. Yeah, so if you can drop a one that you can hear Liam. But while you do this, quick introduction. Oh, Jose, hey, man. What's up? Yes, great. So Liam is an artist, music producer, creative entrepreneur, and a law student. You are like the Tom Morello of San Francisco, music and legal. He specializes in music production and sound design with Ableton Live, as well as creative business strategies and taking your music career to the next level. You can follow him on all the social platforms at Liam_Shai. We'll drop the link here. You're very welcome, Bobby, to do this. I love to deliver on what we promise, and I'm so honored and thankful and grateful to Liam to actually offer to do this. Liam, what are we going to see now? What's following next? Let us know.
Yeah. So I wanted to kind of approach this workshop from a combination of three things, really. One is modular hardware, modular synthesis and modular hardware. Two is Ableton Live, including showcasing some of the sort of features I'm most excited about in Live 11. And three, kind of bringing it all together in the context of live performance. So some powerful live performance techniques, and hopefully inspiring you guys to think about how to take your live performance rigs to the next level. So that's what it's all about.
That's great. I'm very excited. And frankly, in full transparency, to minimize the glitch, we have actually Liam offered to pre-record it, which we're going to live stream now. But he's going to come back after the live performance in about now to do a live Q&A, a proper live Q&A. That unfortunately for everybody, I will be the one hosting. So make sure you pay attention to the performance. Put your questions in the chat box or hold them for the live Q&A. But yes, we're coming back with a live Q&A with Liam for about 30 minutes where we can answer all the questions about that you will have about his rig, about his performance, about Ableton Live 11 or the beta of it. So without further ado, let's jump.
So what's up, guys? Thank you so much for joining me today. My name is Liam Shai. I'm an Ableton certified trainer, DJ for like 20 years, music producer for like 15. A good deal of that spent in psytrance, but I've done a ton of stuff. Yeah, today we're going to talk about Modular, we're going to talk about Ableton, and we're going to talk about kind of the power that can happen when you bridge those two worlds together, sort of a best of both worlds approach. So that's kind of how I'm going to take this angle today. This is kind of an interesting workshop because it's both an introductory workshop and a beginner's workshop, but it's also kind of an advanced workshop at the same time. So wherever you are in your kind of musical journey, I think you're going to get something out of today's session. So I will do a little bit of an intro to Modular for those who are new to Modular, but then for those of you who are more experienced, I think there's going to be some really cool workflow stuff and technique and theory that will appeal to you as well. Straight up off the bat, like one of the premises of this workshop was why you might consider Modular in your workflow at all, right? Because we have DAWs, we have Ableton, we have Logic, we have all these tools. Why do we need this? Okay, so let's start there. Number one, and as somebody who comes from a DAW digital audio background, this is really fun. It's just super fun. It's engaging, it's exciting, it's visceral, it's hands-on. It makes you feel connected to the music and the sound in a way that I honestly just never really experienced with the digital sort of workflow. So just off the gate, like it's just super fun. So that's reason number one. Reason number two, I actually find sound design is easier on this. And I know it might look intimidating, right? There's a lot of knobs, there's a lot of buttons, there's a lot of wheels, right? All kind of stuff going on. But sound design in the DAW, personally, I've always just found it to be a bit more of a chore. Like it's not so enjoyable, and I'll wind up getting kind of guilty, like sort of hunting for presets, like, oh, I just need a bass line, I just need a patch, whatever. And kind of, with this, you don't have that, you can't just get lazy, But by that same token, it's not a chore, it's not work, it doesn't feel like work, it actually feels a lot more fun and like play. So that's awesome. Number three, it's a different mindset than looking at a computer. And for those of you who work day jobs, night jobs, in between jobs, whatever, a lot of us look at a computer 24/7, and then it's kind of like when you want to decompress and you want to make music, do you want to look at a computer again? It's kind of like, maybe, but I don't know, it can be kind of taxing, right? You need to do a lot of yoga if you're on the computer all the time. So the ergonomics and this whole kind of headspace, and it just gets you out of that and free of that. And you'll notice that even though I am using Ableton Live, there is a computer here. I don't look at the computer at all. It's all interfaced through my controller, which I'll get into later. So number four, it's a fantastic growth opportunity. Even for me as like a 15, 20-year veteran of music production and this whole kind of world, I learned so much when I got into Modular, things that I had like kind of knew but didn't really care about, and concepts that were like, oh, that's important, but it just doesn't really come to head as much in the DAW kind of workspace. And when you're in Modular, you have to actually think about like, how do we create a synthesizer? Because we don't have a complete synthesizer a lot of the times, right? We have to build all of the modules from scratch. And so it just forces you to actually learn in a way that sticks. So it's a great growth opportunity. Number five, last reason, it is a fantastic community. I have to say, just in the short time that I've been doing Modular, which is really only since November of last year, so I'm less than a year old into the Modular world and landscape, but I've just found like great Facebook groups, great communities, people who are willing to connect and chat and talk and share ideas. And I don't know, it just sort of like reinvigorated me into this kind of idea of a music production community in a way that I just didn't really, it's like, oh, you do Ableton, everybody does Ableton, But it's like you do Modular, it's like, oh, that's interesting, that's unique, that's special. So that's pretty cool. So those are some of the pros, not all, but five pros. So I'm gonna give you 5 cons at the same time because, there's a good chance maybe Modular is not for everybody, and that's okay. So number one con, there's no presets, right? It's really difficult to save patches. That could be a pro maybe, but it's definitely from the point of view of creating a live set or creating an album or something where you want to recycle similar patches. You're gonna have to memorize them, you're gonna have to write them down, you're gonna have to kind of program your brain in a different way to be able to come back to those things, because there's, at least not in my system, there's no presets. Con number 2, and this is, we're just gonna get the elephant in the room, is very expensive. There's just no beating around the bush. Modular's not cheap. There are cheap options, there definitely are, and I'll get into that like a little bit later, maybe if you're looking to get into Modular, what some of those kind of starter kits could look like. But yeah, it's a money suck. There's just no beating around the bush there. So that's a con. That's definitely a con. Number 3, there's definitely a learning curve, right? I mean, you're not going to just get this, open it up, and be off to the races. So you have to be prepared and okay with this idea that it could take you a year before you make anything that even sounds decently passable. For me, even with my experience, I would say it took me 10 months. Like basically from about until a week ago, I didn't make anything that sounded good. And then I made something that sounded good and I decided to make a workshop around it. So here we are. So there's a learning curve. Number 4, you have to kind of learn to be okay with the imperfections, right? It's not the DAW, we're not drawing automation. I come from a background of being very surgical, a lot of precision, right? Everything that I do in the digital space has so much thought around it. And with this, it's much more of an organic process. So that could be good, but it could be a con if you kind of struggle with that and you want everything to be perfect. So you have to be okay with imperfections. Number 5, it can be difficult to recreate live. That's true. However, what I'm hopefully going to accomplish today, and this is really, and we'll get into this, the high level of what my kind of like thought process is all about, but it's really kind of about creating this bridge between the studio and the stage, right? How do we write songs and craft songs when we're in our house, but that are already designed and built and optimized for live performance? But it can be difficult to recreate live because it gets, it's one thing to do a 10-minute set. It's another thing to do a 60-minute set or, longer. So anyway, all right. So moving on, I'm just going to give you guys a very brief for anybody who's new here, like what is modular synthesis? What is this all about? How is this different from regular synthesis? So regular synthesis, right? It generally revolves around this concept of partials and overtones, starting maybe from a pure fundamental, like a sine wave, 440 hertz, and then adding harmonics, right, through square waves, sawtooth waves, all kinds of in-between waves, right? Every kind of complex wave that exists. And these harmonics form complex wave shapes and they add depth and complexity. And sometimes they even have precise mathematical relationships, right? Like the overtone series. Second harmonic vibrates twice as fast as the fundamental. Third harmonic vibrates 3 times as fast, right, as the fundamental, and so on and so forth. So that's the harmonic series. And so this idea of synthesis is really about sculpting these harmonics, right? That's really what synthesis is about. So it's going to either happen usually by, one or the other, either through addition or through subtraction. So through combining waves or through refining and filtering complex waves that you start with. And this is something that's known as East Coast versus West Coast synthesis, which, by the way, I actually hadn't heard about before I got into modular, but it's a huge, massive ideology, and there's a lot of history behind it. Buchla, Moog, all these people, they've been a part of this idea of this concept in terms of how do you actually go about and construct your synthesis. So the way that I always kind of learned it in school is this idea of the Moog style, which is subtractive synthesis. You start with a complex wave shape and then you filter it down, right? Oscillator, filter, amp, right? Your basic subtractive synth. That's how I always kind of learned it. But then there's the Buchla and the Surge style. By the way, the Moog style, that's East Coast synthesis, right? So when you hear that East Coast, West Coast, that's the East Coast style. The West Coast style is, and we're in San Francisco, so hey, is more of this kind of more, I don't almost want to say experimental, but Buchla/Surge style, which is about combining simpler wave shapes to create more complex, harmonically rich content, right? So rather than starting rich and filtering, you sort of start simple and build. And sometimes people refer to that as additive synthesis. Not exactly additive synthesis, but the idea is adding, right? Furthermore, last thing I want to say on this, if you're getting into modular, you might hear about 3U versus 4U versus 5U. Everything that you see here is 3U. This is the Doepfer standard, right? And it has to do with the height of each module, right? So most of your modules are going to be 3U. This has sort of become the accepted format, but you do come across the 4U format, which is Surge and Buchla. Those are going to be taller modules. And then you have the 5U, which is the Moog format. So anyway, okay, let's get back a little bit to sort of some of the concepts about synthesis itself, and in particular, voltage control, which is really the heart of what this whole thing is about. This is what drives us, right? So if you're used to kind of like what I'm used to, which is sort of working with MIDI, it's all about multi-instrument digital interface, right? You're sending these digital control messages for pitch, gate, velocity, right? All those sort of things, and that's how you control your synth. But by and large, in the modular world, we're working with an analog control voltage signal, and you do have digital modules. It's not to say that every module is analog, because they're not. There's a lot of digital modules. However, they're still analog voltage controlled. And voltage control can be thought of exactly the same way as MIDI. It's just a different way of communicating. And it's just basically how many volts of information are you sending to a particular module, and how is that module then going to interpret it, right? And that range typically is -5 volts to +5 volts. So you have a 10-volt range, and that could be for things like pitch, gate, triggers, all the things that you would normally control with MIDI, but you're just doing it with analog voltage. So luckily, unless you're designing modules, you don't have to worry too much about that. But there are MIDI to CV converters. I've got one right here. It's kind of tied in right here, but the CV OCD, I can take MIDI into that, and then I have 12 outputs, which are then 4 CV outputs, and then 8 gate outputs, which can be used to then control my device. My devices, my modules, I can sequence from my iPad, for example, or sequence from Ableton Live using a MIDI to CV converter. And there's a lot of modules that do that. So some of the basic CV functions you're going to come across can be pitch, gate, trigger, clock, LFOs, lots of other complex modulation. And then we also get a little bit more complicated because we can also mix audio levels and control voltage levels in the same signal path. So that's a common thing as well. And there's a lot to talk about there. So let's kind of transition to audio connections, because it's super important when you start to work in modular to kind of think about audio, running things in and out. How's it all going to hook up? How's it going to connect? And what are the sort of things you need to be aware of? Because modular levels are super hot. And if you're not careful, they're about 2 or 3 times as loud as a normal audio signal that you're probably used to working with. So you could easily blow your ears, blow a speaker if you're not careful. So you want to kind of think about that as you're starting off and building your setup, is how are you communicating in and out between modular and either Ableton Live through your audio interface or through a traditional mixer. So one of the things, this is always very, standard introductory topic, is the concept of an AC coupled versus a DC coupled interface. If you're working in modular, you're gonna want those DC coupled outputs, not only so you can just easily work between audio level and line level or modular level, but also so that you can then potentially use Ableton Live or whatever to control your modular rig with control voltage and actually send control voltage out those audio outputs. So in my particular case, I've got the Expert Sleepers ES8, very simple interface. It's got USB, and I've got 4 inputs which go into Ableton Live, and I've got 8 outputs. And I can use that to either track and record my modular, or I can use the outputs to then send CV into my modular and actually sequence it from Ableton Live, which is really cool. So let's now kind of pivot. That's like your modular 101. If you're new to modular, there you go. If you've been in modular for a while, you're ready for that section to be over. Let's go ahead and talk about how we can integrate our modular setup with Ableton Live, because I think that's kind of where things start to get a little bit more interesting, and also where you have a lot of options, right? There's not necessarily one way to do things. There's a lot of different ways to do things. And I always want to kind of recommend you to start off by thinking about what's your goal and what's your vision, because everybody's vision is different. Maybe you want to do drums. Maybe you want to do synths. Maybe you want to do live performance. Maybe there's sound design stuff or atmospheres. There's all kinds of different sort of goals that you could value. And those are going to kind of direct and drive the decisions that you make, right? They're not all going to be the same. In my specific case, and that's kind of what I'm going to focus on today, I'm just giving you guys what I'm doing as an example in hopes of inspiring you and getting your kind of wheels turning, but it's by no means like I'm telling you this is how you should do it and this is the best way to do it. It's none of that at all. This is really just a starting point for more of like a larger conversation. Number one, you're gonna have to solve for clock. That's always gonna be your kind of first issue that you have to come across. And the reason for that is because you wanna have a nice sync between Ableton Live and your modular, right? If you're at 145 BPM in Ableton, you want your modular to also follow that tempo. And you don't want latency, and you don't want any kind of jitter or any of these other things. There's a lot of different ways to do this. I'm not gonna get into every single way that you can solve the clock problem. But what I will tell you is the way that I solved the clock problem, I'm using a device called the ERM multi-clock. And I'm not gonna lie, it was a really obscenely expensive solution, but it starts and stops on a dime. I read a lot in the forums about people having latency issues, jitter issues, all kinds of sync issues between their DAW and their computer and their modular. And I have had none of these issues because of the ERM multi-clock. And actually, I'll show you guys really quickly how this works. We'll go over to Ableton Live. I have a clock sync channel, and then I have a ERM multi-clock plugin. And that's kind of the beauty of this, is I just drop this plugin in my session, and then I set my external output, and I just send it out to output 8, which I'm not using in my expert sleepers. And this is going to send an analog signal into the ERM. Well, it's digital originally, and then the ERM can convert it either to analog, or in my case, I have it actually going to MIDI DIN sync, which is then going into Pamela's new workout. Kind of complicated. There's a lot of clock stuff happening here, but essentially clock comes in, I can set it to go out. I have 2 actual clock outputs, one for just the clock and then one for start stop. So it'll actually start and stop in time with my session as well. So that's through a breakout cable called the modular whip that goes in to Pamela's new workout. And I have a clock in and I have a start stop in. And then from Pamela's new workout, I have now 8 clock outputs, which I can route throughout my session. And what's great about that is that I can set them at different rates, right? That's kind of where the magic comes in, because maybe I want some of them to just go at 145 BPM, but I might want some others to go half or a quarter or twice as fast or 4 times as fast or whatever. So I have that kind of flexibility using that solution. So that's kind of what I'm doing for clock. However you solve for clock, you will have to solve for it. It is an inevitable sort of part of the process in just getting everything to kind of sync and play nice together. So cool. Let's kind of get back into like what I'm doing and what this sort of session is about, because some of the stuff that you guys heard was coming from Ableton Live, and then some of what you heard was coming from the modular setup. And so I want to just I'll just tell you right now, the kick, live. The bass, live. Serum, actually. All the percussion, all the drums, live. The kick and most of the percussion were one-shot samples that I programmed with MIDI using Impulse, and I'll explain why in a little bit. Then there's only 2 synth layers. One of the synth layers was live recorded from the module, but it was already tracked in. And then the second synth layer I do live. So more on that to kind of come. But the idea here is that, this is the part. This is the part where I tell you my vision. What's my vision? All right, so here it is. This is my vision, and it's not to say it's the best vision or the right vision, but it's the vision that works for me. One of the things that I love about modular is that it is unpredictable, right? There's a little bit of gentle chaos or a lot of chaos to it. And that to me is exciting. However, I've also seen live modular performances where there's too much chaos. It gets carried away. And then it's not danceable, you can't sink your teeth into it, and there's just too much change going on for you to even recognize what the song is. And so for me, the way that I'm kind of thinking about this in my own sort of workflow is that I want to create music in the studio that will easily transition into a live performance. So some of it has to be recorded, some of it has to be the same. Every time you hear the track, there's going to be those elements that are the same, and that's the pre-recorded line of modular. That's the drums, that's the kick, that's the bass. However, what's happening to them is going to change, right? I did a lot of breaks with the APC 40, and I'll explain how all that worked. I did a lot of different transitions and filters, and things come in and things go out, and all that's going to be unique and organic and kind of go with the moment. And then I have one element that is just another basically synth lead line that I'm doing completely 100% live, organic in the moment. And that is what's going to give us that sort of change and that exploration, and it's not going to be exactly the same, right? So that's kind of, to me, I think an ideal workflow, because now you have that balance, right? You have the balance of the chaos, but also enough sort of familiarity that people kind of can recognize the song and be like, oh, I love this song, this is great. So Pamela's new workout is just sending clock into the clock input of Renee, is tracking the melody, and I can adjust these knobs to sort of change the pitch of whatever I want that melody to be. And that is the hook, essentially, because I kind of am a big believer in hooks for both the pre-recorded part and the part that I was doing live. They're very similar Renee sequences here. Okay, so clock goes into here, 145 BPM, then what happens? We select some notes, right? Pitch, okay, that all makes sense. Select a scale, right? I can quantize it. But then what happens? So XCV out, and then I go into the 1 volt per octave input on DPO. DPO is an oscillator. There's 2 sides to it. It's a dual oscillator. So I'm literally just using a sawtooth wave. The way that we then kind of control this is I take my sawtooth out and I put it into Javelin, which is a WMD device, which is both a VCA and an envelope generator. And one of the things that you'll hear when you first start to get into modular is that you need VCAs, which are basically voltage controlled amplifiers. Kind of boring in and of itself, but they're cool. They can be used for modulation, which is good, but I like to kind of combine things a little bit, you know? So I got an envelope generator and a VCA, And what that allows me to do is kind of sculpt the sound. So with this, right, I can kind of gate the sound, right? This is literally what's the amp envelope, which if you're familiar with normal traditional synthesis, same kind of thing, right? Attack, decay, sustain, release. But with one trick up its sleeve, which is that Javelin also has a looping function, which is kind of fun. So you can kind of loop it and get your own little sort of sub-rhythms going on, which sometimes sound good and sometimes sound bad, but it's kind of a fun little effect. So, okay, we got the sawtooth coming out, it's going into the envelope, and then where does it go from here? Well, then it actually goes just straight into my filter, and if you think about basic subtractive synthesis, what we all grew up on, right? Oscillator, filter, amp. So we've got our oscillator, we've got our amp, and so now we go to the filter, and that's the last step before we actually go out to the mixer. And so for the filter, I'm using this absolutely phenomenal filter called QPOS by Make Noise, which is a stereo filter that has a really interesting trick up its sleeve, which is that it will adjust the cutoff frequency based on the even and odd harmonics, rather than just sort of a normal traditional filter, which will just cut all frequencies equally. This will actually detect the input signal and determine what frequencies are coming in, and then create these even and odd harmonic sweeps that you can then boost or cut, which is just super fun and very musical and very psytrance. It's like the most psytrance thing I've ever heard in my life. So I'm addicted to this filter. I love it. So that's it. So we come out the amp, we go into the filter, we come out of the filter, by the way, and this is all mono so far. A lot of Eurorack stuff is mono, but there is more stereo happening. But this has actually 2, 4, 6, 8 stereo outputs. So even if you send a mono signal in, it has this kind of stereo ability. It will separate the frequencies and divide them up amongst the left and the right channel, which is great. And now I can take, and I'm in this case using my high pass outs straight into my mixer. This is, by the way, this is a Tesseract Eurorack mixer, how I can kind of connect between modular level and normal audio level if I'm playing a live show, for example. So this then has like normal outputs. I've got 4 stereo channels, which I can mix and match. And then it also has sends, which is really, really handy as well. But before we get into the sends, there's one last part of this patch, which I want you guys to pay attention to, which is this one up here. It is called Simple ADSR. This is by Blue Lantern. So we have our amp envelope, but I also have a filter envelope. And the reason for the filter envelope is to create movement within the filter that happens organically and changes over time. So rather than a sort of static filter, even if I'm not touching the filter, there's going to be different levels of change. Also does looping. So you can hear now the simple ADSR is affecting the filter cutoff. And not only that, but I have it clocked over here to pressure points so that I can rhythmically change that, multiply it by 2 or divide it by 2 in real time. So that's really fun because it's kind of nice to be able to, that's all courtesy of Pam's, by the way. You can do that through menu diving, but it's nice just in a performative way. You guys are probably sensing a theme here. I like to produce music in the way that I like to perform live, right? It should be very performative. Things should be just very easy, very musical, already mapped out. It does take more work in the beginning to pre-program it, but then in the end, you get that nice reward of being able to just quickly kind of morph and jump through different rhythmical variations in a way that's fun.
All right, so we're gonna look at what is CV Tools and why exactly would you want to use it. Now, the power of modular synthesis, as we sort of talked about, is not always the best on its own, right? There's a lot of limitations. Some of these limitations include the lack of presets, how expensive it is, how hard it is to travel with, and so on and so forth. And so kind of the idea here that I'm really intrigued by and interested in and digging into and sharing with you guys is how can we combine the power of modular alongside the power of the DAW? By taking this sort of best of both worlds approach, we can combine all of the benefits of software and Ableton Live in particular with all of the benefits of modular hardware and therefore become super producers. With that, let's just kick things off. CV instrument using my Command F key command. Here we go, CV instrument, drag and drop, click the disclosure triangle here to open it up. Then we're gonna need to pull audio from, so I'll say audio from modular record, and then I will say pre-effects. And then I need to send pitch and gate into the modular system. So to start off with, I'm gonna say CV pitch 2, and I will say external out, and I will send this out 7, as we discussed a few moments ago. And then I'm gonna say CV gate 2, and I'm gonna say external out, and I'm going to say, I believe that was 6. Excellent. So now we're sending pitch and gate information out of live into the ES8 into our DPO, which we can see here via the 1 volt per octave input. So that's the pitch information coming from CV instrument. It's going into our 1 volt per octave. I'm gonna turn off frequency modulation for a second. And then we've got this final wave, which is kind of like a nasty sawtooth wave coming out of DPO. So that's going into just our normal input for the Optimix, for our VCA, and then we control the gate because DPO doesn't actually have a gate input. So we have to use this control input instead and then set our knobs here accordingly, and then we take that output and run it into the Tesseract. So the next thing that we need to do is we need to calibrate our oscillator. So we'll go ahead and click here on the calibrate, then we'll hit next. Cool, and then here we can basically see the linearity, or non-linearity in this case, of how this oscillator is tracking pitch across the frequency range. Great, so we have a usable range. We can go ahead and hit finish. Go in and start to make some patterns. Just a very, very simple pattern just to demonstrate. One of the things that gets really, awesome about this from a live performance standpoint is you could, for example, have one pattern of MIDI notes ready to go, and then a different pattern of MIDI notes ready to go. And now you have these ready to fire on something like the APC 40. But in order to really make this thing come alive, what we want is some automated modulation. So for that, what we need to do is go to our ES8, and let's take a couple of the outputs from ES8, and let's go ahead and bring them in to modulate some of the parameters of the QPass filter. So I'm gonna go ahead and take output number 3, run my cables behind here, and we will go into the frequency 1 filter cutoff parameter, and we will take output 4 from the ES8, and we will stick this into frequency 2. We have 2 elements of the cutoff frequency that we can modulate here, which is awesome. So we've now got 2 modulation sources that are patched in from live. However, on the Ableton Live side, they're not yet assigned. So let's go ahead and do that now. All right, so let's go ahead and open back up our CV instrument. And now here we have our envelope. So let's go ahead and take the CV output here to our first output, so external output, and then we selected 3. So first I'm gonna set this to looping so that it will just continue to repeat rather than just playing through one time. So let's go ahead and start with that. And as we adjust the cutoff frequency here, we'll hear how it changes over time. And what's interesting too is if I stop the MIDI coming from live, we'll hear the effects of the loop as the sound trails out. Loop, 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 loop. Pretty cool. Right, so coming back to the concept of live performance, right, and being performative with your tools. Unless you are a 1,000-armed Hindu god or goddess, right, you're gonna have a hard time getting the types of complex changes over time, right? The really creative stuff, right, where the sort of the magic of live performance happens and the magic of music really happens. Because really the whole kind of magic of music is this idea of change over time. Everything I've shown you so far has been one way, Ableton Live into Modular. So I want to show you one last thing, which is Modular into Live. So for this, we're going to use a tool called CV In. Now let's take a really quick look at how this is routed on the hardware side, and then we'll come back to Live. All right, so the routing here is actually pretty simple, and I apologize it's not labeled, but it's just one single cable at the moment, which is coming from input 3 out of one of the LFO outputs on this Robow 3PT. And this is just essentially an LFO generator. So it'll generate LFO, low frequency oscillator CV, and that's it. So it's just coming out of one of the LFO outputs and going into our ES8. All right, so now back on the live side, what we need to do is pull our CV from. So I'm gonna go ahead and flip this to DC since this is not pitch CV information. I'm going to say external input, and I'm going to say pull it from input number 3. Excellent. And now I can go ahead and click my setup, and we can go ahead and click next, 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 next. Excellent, and we should see it. And how cool is that? As I move the LFO, you'll notice as I increase it to the right, the speed increases. As I decrease it to the left, it slows down quite a lot. And we see that behavior represented here on the CV input. This is awesome. And then let's go ahead and we can actually adjust the range here. So I can increase or decrease this range if I'm feeling like, oh, this range is a little sort of wacky, and I can change it from unipolar to bipolar as well. And now I can start to see, oh, okay, here we go. Getting a little bit more of the range that I would expect, although we're clipping here. So I'm gonna increase this volt range here. Typically, your normal range is gonna be 10 volts, right? -5 to +5. And your mileage will vary depending on the module, some are less. So that's level 1, right? Level 1 is just, hey, let's bring this in. But level 2 now is we can now map this to any parameter within live. Just as an example, if I wanted to adjust our drums. So now you can see across channels, right? CV in here, I hit map, mapped it to the drums length. Drums are way over here on the drums channel, went to the macro on the drums length. And in fact, if we solo these drums, we can see that we're now getting LFO control over the length of our drums, right, from our impulse drum instrument here. And that's now being controlled externally by a hardware modular LFO. How cool is that? So we can control our modular with live, and we can control live with our modular. And if you guys remember from the very beginning of what I said is so exciting and interesting about CV tools, it is this ability for us to have bi-directional communication between the hardware, the software, and take the best of both worlds, to put it in the words of Skeletor, and make them even more eviler.
Really actually what all that doing up to on the road on the modular rig make noise recordings, which is TSA compatible. So it's sitting at overhead bin and it won't get any trouble. And I love this thing. It's great. It's a slightly different setup than my studio A setup, where it's much more advanced, where it's a sort of DJ style, live performance style versus a songwriting and music production style rig. So in the interest of time, we are now sort of at the end. I won't be able to go into all the details that I did on some of the other setups. The quick notes that you're going to work on here. We've got a demo track in live, which is sort of a live techno style kind of hybrid kind of style. Similar to how I've got kick, bass, and percussion all being treated live, and then I have two three to kind of give live and analog acid style beat live. And I've also got a kit machine to queue up, which I'm using to basically do live which is kind of fun. Everything is actually in process in this analog 4-track kit machine. It's running it many components. It's all getting some and then going to my final output. So it's kind of definitely a bit of an over-the-top setup for sure. And I don't know how feasible it would be to travel with the kit machine, although I don't know. We'll see. But I could definitely see at least the modular rig here with live for sort of where I need to be more nimble. Maybe I throw it into 3 for a slightly bigger show that I run headlining or something where I That would be awesome. So anyway, so it's basically all getting routed. It's basically like a signal audio processing kind of interface. I've got a filter, I've got a joystick, I've got a speed button, and I've got this one controller here, which is kind of actually study into the ADT and again, what this music for you. But what's cool about this is a bit more compact. So again, this could be good for learning more components. And then I've also got the rolling block here, which is cool because I can actually trigger themes similar to recording, which is awesome. So, and this actually can be wireless, which is just fantastic. So very easy to travel with. So that's kind of the overview. Let's just kind of get into some of my favorite features in Live 11. Starting off with this history map. This is nicely live device. So you run nicely live or you run nicely live switch or you run nicely live standard with that optional nicely live purchase add-on. I highly recommend because it just opens up this world of devices. And this is really cool because it's kind of like a new style delay. And so appropriately, I'm using a multi-junction with my technician to do these kind of pitch-shifted delays and just sound awesome. So I'll go ahead and just like file up some songs here and just kind of demo it so you guys can sort of hear it in action and just see what it's doing.
In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. And the earth was without form and void. And darkness was upon the face of the deep. The Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters.
So, as you can tell, that is a lot of fun. You can hear obviously the delay. It works great for this playthrough. I'm sampling this like really, I think that 1970s version of Genesis because I'm kind of prototyping the track and I want to do Genesis because it's just so epic. But yeah, so I'll still imitate here.
And God said,
So you gotta be careful with analog sampling. So you can hear it speeds up as we move the position.
let there be light.
Which is really fun, and we can slow that down.
And there was light.
Repitch it, of course.
And God saw.
And right now the two channels are linked, but of course we can unlink these channels to have separation between what the delay is doing in the left channel and what the delay is, of course, doing in the right channel.
The light that it was good. And God divided the light from the darkness. And God called the light.
Super fun. We can turn on freeze mode, which is cool if I kind of capture a piece of the sound.
Day, and the darkness he called night.
in here. And of course you have your classic LFOs that you can add in for things like vibrato. You want to get super wild. A little low cut, a little high cut. Of course the feedback amount, dry wet control, stereo mount, and just an amazing, fun little device. So there's a little taste of what's to come in Live 11.
Cool. So one of the next features of Live 11 that I want to talk about is to improve control over follow actions. So follow actions have existed for as long as I can remember. Possibly since the beginning, I started on Live 4, so I can't say definitively before that, but as long as I can remember, we have follow actions. And follow actions work really well in sessions, what we're doing here, to get a little bit of control chaos. It's something that I'm really interested in terms of live performance, because I want to have like the smallest amount of sort of clips or scenes, if you will, possible. And then I want those scenes, clips, to then have a larger amount of expression that can be sort of extracted from them. And one of the ways that we can do that is with follow actions. So we put that will allow us to select clips. We can then assign to follow actions. Options as well. I've got some follow actions set up here. I've got them turned on. And it's very similar to how it was before. It's a more streamlined interface. But we now have the ability to link and unlink to bring clips from the group. Meaning, rather than other equipment that we have to follow the same rules, what we can do now, like for example, in the beginning when I first launched this stuff, I have these sort of, by the way, this is the
Percussion channel here. I'll just launch it for you guys. And you can already see now this next clip has been selected, but what it's going to do is it's going to play through this clip 8 times before the follow action kicks into place, which is fantastic. And at that point, yep, now it's going to start moving and doing follow actions with these other clips. So on this one, we can see that I have it linked and set up to go and play through one time.
However, the clips in the middle are unlinked, meaning that they are not going to have to follow the same of playing algorithm. Rather, they'll just be able to cycle through based on the rate which we set. So we can look at what rate that is here, and then unlike it in bars, beats, and 16 notes. So 2 16 notes equals a 16, which means that every time this note occurs, follow action will kick in. So in this case, what the follow action is doing is playing any other clip within the group. So it might play the same clip twice, and then play a different clip, and it will kind of just randomly author that behavior, but in this kind of more controlled and musical way, which I like. So sometimes I want those clips to play through like an intro. I don't want it to be jumping around, because these are different energy levels at low energy and high energy. But in those points where I'm kind of more in the middle of the set, which is really key, this clip and this clip, so it's maybe increase energy and intensity as we get down to the final thing. This is most noticeable if you look at the baseline. So just to quickly show you what's happening there.
We start off with just a very standard bass line here, and then we increase the intensity by increasing the rhythm. And then we do that a third time, and then we get into our nice sort of galloping psytrance bass. And once you bring the kick in, and you can hear the follow actions are going. So pay special attention now that you know what to listen for. So we see we've got just some closed hats, but then we're going to go to this clip, and we're going to get a little bit more open hi-hat action happening as we move through. So again, different levels of energy and intensity. There we go. So second level of energy, third level of energy, and then finally our fourth level of energy.
get a little bit more of this dynamic because which is fantastic. Another cool feature of Live 11 is the ability to add more actions to speed rather than just clicks. So the action tab was able to just click the on your sheet, and now we get to add an edit. We're going to get detail here, don't switch, just tab all of the track devices. So this one track really down to the devices. And then you can turn on some of the functions before you add behavior. Personally, I'm not using that at this point because I do like to have that benefit control. However, in some potentially more complex live performances or even live performances where you have one person that first works this type of workflow, that's useful to be able to turn on to sections and look at them into the solution of the controlled chaos to have those things happen, or also not controlled chaos. You can plan it very systematic way. After the 4 bars, you can see that in 8 bars, you know, however, so very, very cool stuff with follow actions and live data. So one of the next new features that I'm super pumped on is the inclusion of what's known as modular. Let's take a look. So going back to our initial scale, as I bring up the actual creation information, you see that we don't actually go very, very simply to display diagram. It's one line long, it's nothing fancy, it's just a one every 8 notes, and by itself it would normally be kind of boring. However, with the inclusion of probability and velocity randomization, we're able to now get much more dynamic play from the static MIDI. So let's have a listen. One of the first things you might notice is that not every single video actually plays. And the reason for that is in the probability section, I've gone in on a note-by-note basis and actually reduced the probability of being percent to around 75%. So what that means is that we'll always get every other note hitting, which rounds out the note pattern and really anchor down to the expression. But then again, every so often some of those notes will kind of create some position. Awesome. On top of that, you can of course adjust the velocity just as you could before. But you'll notice that when I cover, I have the velocity line and then the second line right above it. And what that is our range of velocity that we can then choose to randomize based on the amount side of here. So you can have a lot of randomization or just a little bit of randomization, and all taking place in the control group. So it's not too and the same thing with my kick pattern, and on this one again, it's just a little bit. But I put the option for some fills here at the very end. And on these, I turned the probability down a lot lower because I don't want them to happen too often or to get annoying. But it is nice to then sort of otherwise allow have these kind of organic forms taking place.
So there they played. There they didn't play.
Great. So sometimes one play, sometimes two play, and then sometimes neither of them play. And again, there's adjusting the velocity here for the two plays where you normally want to be at a slightly lower velocity than the rest of the field. So very exciting stuff, particularly in the context of live performance, because what we really want to do is get a lot of mileage out of our parts, right? Just have kind of the least amount of input data with the most amount of output expression. I think that is very, very key to creating efficient live sets. All right, so the next new feature that I'm extremely excited about is the addition of these macros. So as you can see here, I have an audio set track, and this is processing a mid-3, and I have this audio set track getting turned on and off with a slider. So particularly, I mean, there's a ton of different stuff in here, but for me, particularly rhythmic splicing, rhythmic breaks, that's something that I'm mostly interested in terms of live performance. Because what you can do is have a static MIDI pattern, which I'm cool, you can do here, just a very simple static pattern of loops. That's great, but after a while that would get annoying. Just like, over again. So you want to be able to create inputs and maybe listen to the time and so that feedback.
Slowly bring that up. And we can go here and see that we can play with these. And we get a completely different sound out of the TV3.
Well, having to do that in real time would be kind of a lot, right? That's 16 knobs now, obviously you can't do them all at the same time. So, big new feature, macro snapshots, meaning that you can take essentially a picture of the state of all of our macro knobs at any given point. So, for example, I can move this, right, give it different interesting variation, and then just hit play. And now that snapshot is saved. So I can go to a previous snapshot, and then I can go back to the snapshot that I just made, and all those knobs will shoot into that position. So this is very performant and very powerful. Because now, just single launch of one of the snapshots, which of course are expensive, you can manage the complex changes happening at the touch of the button. Very, very cool, very, very powerful. Super excited about this feature. Macros, I think, have always been one of the strong selling points of the live workflow, and with live wedding, it's truly taking it to the next level. So, very exciting stuff. Excited for you guys to keep those on and see. Alright, so the last new feature that I feel like stuck out to me, again, from a live performance context. Not as sexy as some of the other features, but equally very, very important. I think it's what we track CPU. So on a channel per channel basis, you can now measure the CPU way of the musical skills that are on that particular channel. So previously, we've always had a CPU meter up at the top. That's just to see the overall CPU hit of the entire session. And sometimes you might have a really good or something that's just really taxing your CPU a lot. You can really gain this, again, from a live performance perspective, because we're on laptops, we're on desktops, and oftentimes, all the time, you want to approach your live performance with the mindset of the PC. You don't want to set the class in the middle of the show, and one of the best ways to do that is to keep the replay down as low as possible. So, kind of just a small thing in some ways, but very powerful and important to get some kind of better analysis of our sets and exactly we are consistent. Feature that we have is very stable and dependable performance set. Yeah, those are just some very high level things to look out for in Live 11. Obviously, not super crazy deep dives, but I just wanted to kind of highlight some of the features that really spoke to me. Again, because one of the things that I sort of like, I'm on that soapbox about all the time is really the concept of live performance. Encouraging people to do more complex live performances. DJ is great, but for me, I want to do more. I want to have more control, and I want to be able to maximize the creative potential that is available to us. I mean, with all this amazing technology, it would be awesome to see that shift happen, especially in the music industry. To see more folks embrace these kinds of more complex systems in the interest of enhancing the experience for our fans to dance for, and really sort of showcasing more of ourselves as artists, right? And putting more of our vision into the expression that we comes out of speakers at the end of the day. I hope you guys enjoyed this pretty crazy wild ride. This is an action-packed talk. There's a lot of information in this talk, a lot to digest, but it's super fun to put this all together, and I'm excited to keep it on.
Wow, and here we are. Liam, thank you so much for doing this. Actually, two demos in one. Modular synths and Ableton Live 11.
Yeah.
So thank you so much, and also we got a chance to see two layout to set up. Can you tell us more about? You had like the full blown with the window kind of home setup, and then the portable one that you can take with you with or without the tape machine.
Yeah, exactly. So I am kind of lucky that so I live in like a loft downtown San Francisco,
Mm-hmm.
and that was the first setup that you guys saw. That's basically my, home work kind
Yeah.
of main space, which is awesome. And then about after a year of living here, I learned that there was a basement. And I came down here and there's like some weird rooms. It's like an old historic building from the 1930s. And I
Mm.
found one of these rooms that was like perfect to put a studio in. And so I ended up contacting the building management and proposing to them to let me put a studio in, which I thought for sure they're going to say no way. Like, why would we let you do that?
Uh-huh.
And to my surprise, they said, yeah, that's fine. So I rented it out and I gutted it, and I ended up having to basically build a room within a room. But yeah,
Yeah.
so I ended up turning it into kind of studio B, if you will, which is where I am
Sweet.
now. Yeah, yeah,
Sweet.
yeah. And having that kind of separation between my, and it's all a little bit, you'll notice like with me, the production stage and the live performance stage are not as separated as maybe with a lot of artists where it's like they're in the studio and then they're doing live. For me, it's like I like to create with live performance in mind from the beginning, so that when I go to create a live performance set, it's already kind of lending itself to that, rather than having to try to think about it later. Does that make
Yeah.
sense?
No, absolutely. And beauty of it is you don't have much to travel. Just go downstairs and boom, there you are.
Oh, I'm so super lucky, super lucky. I don't know what happened. I got a miracle.
What is the first instrument that you play with?
Piano.
Piano.
Yeah, I started taking piano lessons from when I was about 7 or 8 years old. But I quickly like became one of those people that I really was not interested in just playing like other people's music, like that's a lot of what piano lessons are, is like play these songs, and I'm like I hate these songs. So for me, I would just like go and jam and kind of do my own thing, and then I learned guitar. And then when I was 16 years old, that's when I basically like ran away from home, dropped out of high school, came to San Francisco, and within 6 months fell into the rave scene and started DJing.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
I was asking you because the guitar is in the back and was wondering if that was the first instrument.
Oh
or
yeah.
not. So
Yeah.
so we got a couple of questions, and
Yeah.
I'm very positive that a lot of people will tune in, like watch the VOD. So it will be available on the website, guys, for all the registered attendees. You still there? Sometimes you freeze, Ian. Liam, are you there? We lost him. All right. Once we get him back, he's gonna dial back in. It's on and off. I don't know why, but we are gonna flag one of the first questions back on. Here you are. So, I mean,
Am I back?
yes, you are. So the question is, which actually I'm going to bring this down here. All right, Rayton production. Were you turning those oscillators in real time? So yes.
Well, in a live performance, probably not. What you would do is you just tune the oscillators once at the beginning,
Yeah.
and then from there, now you can manipulate the pitch safely, either with CV or with MIDI or however. But yeah, you would either want to tune the oscillators once at the beginning, or you're going to need to use something like a quantizer, which is not like a normally when music producers hear quantization, they think about like timing of notes. But in modular, quantizing refers to quantizing pitch information into like a scale, for example.
I see.
So
Thank you so much.
yeah.
So some of the discussion here was about how modular synths are intimidating,
Yeah.
And some people thought about it, but like as an example, Lex was like, I found it to be incredibly intimidating, so she hasn't really looked into buying anything. But And as you said, there's a learning curve and all of that.
Yeah.
But for someone starting, do you have any pointers, like something super easy that they can get hold of and understand the concept?
Yeah, so there is a subset of synthesizers which are known as semi-modular synthesizers.
Yeah.
That'd be a great place to start because you get basically all the sound is working from the moment you open it versus like having to build it all.
Yeah.
But then you have patch points, so you can kind of change the routing and the signal flow. I think probably the number one recommendation for starting out would be the Behringer Neutron.
Ooh.
Yeah, it's really affordable. I think it's $300 new. I got one on Craigslist for $200, which is just insane. I mean, it's so cheap compared to everything else. And it's semi-modular, so you have, it's fully analog, so you have a great, nice analog sound. And it works basically just like normal subtractive synthesis. So, the concepts there would be familiar from the software world, but then you have patch points. The other thing is, YouTube is incredible these days. I mean, for example, the Behringer Neutron, there's like hundreds of tutorial videos on terms of like figuring out patches and stuff like that. So, fire up YouTube, kick back, and, just try to follow along with tutorials. The other company that I would recommend that has amazing sort of like tutorials and YouTube support, because not every company does. A lot of companies have almost no YouTube presence, but is Make Noise. Make Noise was actually my first foray into modular, and they have, I think, the best YouTube channel of any company in modular, like by a landslide. Super fun, super entertaining, really creative, and loads of just sort of how-tos. So if you get some of these modules, you can kind of get in there and follow along. And, it's like anything. You just start small, and then over time, your knowledge will grow.
So I flashed the website. By the way, I apologize. I thought I had shown the Behringer Neutron, but not at all. It was the Poly D, the previous one that I shared. So I was totally wrong.
Oh.
But here, this is the Make Noise website you were mentioning.
Yeah, that's their YouTube. Yeah, it's phenomenal. They have tutorials on every single module that they've released.
Great. I'll definitely pay attention to it. Even though I'm a synth guy, I'm more like, well, everything is patched up for me. I just have to tune the knob, like a Prophet 6 or a Moog subsequent. So what was interesting is you plugged the Ableton Live, which I think came up a week or two, which it didn't come up. It's just a beta. It's a beta. The beta is public now, and you were showing Ableton Live is a DAW that can control modular synths using CVs and all of that, and get the flow. For our audience who doesn't necessarily use Ableton Live, are there other DAWs that you will recommend or have this capability of integrating with modular synths?
The only other one that really jumps out at me would be Bitwig.
Okay. Which is, and I might lose you here, but so I'll complement, but which is kind of was created by some folks who had originally worked on Ableton Live. And so this is like, wow, in and out. But yeah, Bitwig is a DAW that was created by some folks who worked on Ableton Live originally. And I was just saying that, Bitwig is something that was created by folks who worked on the original Ableton Live. And so there's a lot of similarities. So Bitwig would be another option. Yeah, I don't want to speak too much. I think there might be others, but it's not so predominant. I don't even know if FL Studio does it or.
Maybe. I'm not super familiar with FL Studio.
Me neither.
Yeah. I think Ableton Live or Bitwig would be your best options.
Or you get
sure.
I've seen also some external sequencers like what is it, the Beat Step by Arturia now can control also. So that's another way to maybe control devices and then just feed the audio into any DAW that you have out there.
Correct. Yeah. I mean, in terms of just getting the audio in, yeah, any DAW can do that for sure.
Yeah,
For sure.
yeah, yeah.
Um,
What when you travel and when you fly with the modular synths, what does TSA say?
Yeah, I haven't flown yet with it. Well,
Oh,
actually,
okay.
no, that's not true. I did one time, but then kind of lockdown hit, and so I did fly with it one time, and I thought for sure they were going to give me a hard time. And you wouldn't believe it, the guy who was running my case at TSA was into synthesizers, and he knew exactly what it was. I was shocked. I was like, they're gonna think it's a bomb. Like, they're gonna think I'm crazy. Like, there's no way. And he was like, dude, you do modular synths? I was like, yeah. He was like, that's awesome. I was like, so we'll see. So far, so good. But yeah, it's I mean, I think it's fine. It'll be fine. They
Yeah.
they have the wipes, right? They wipe it down. So
Yeah,
this is
yeah,
keep.
So why the tape machine? I mean, you said it's to add
Oh yeah,
another level of complexity, or
yeah. So I'm still experimenting with different use cases with the tape machine, but it really originates from really my overall kind of vision as an artist, because that's really where any technical decisions or any equipment decisions that you make, they shouldn't just be arbitrary. There should be some meaning behind it, and it
Yeah.
should really start with what is your intention. So for me, what I'm really just have always been fascinated with is really combining the past and the future. So I love collecting vinyl. I've been collecting vinyl forever. I particularly have a soft spot for vinyl I have a soft spot for really audio in general from the 70s and 80s in
Mhm.
particular, and even the 60s and 50s to a
Yeah.
certain extent. So what I want to do is bring in some of that nostalgia and some of that noise and that dirt and that analog warm fuzzy feeling that you get from these types of machines, but then also combine it and layer it with like ultra clean, ultra sharp, super four-dimensional, like high quality production at the same time. So you get that kind of old and new working together. And so part of what I'm doing is not just actually queuing tapes with this, but I'm actually routing everything through the mixer, because it's a 4-track, it's an
Yeah.
analog 4-track mixer.
Yeah.
So I have, one channel which is playing tapes. I have one channel, so I'm running the TD. Oh, I can actually change this. Here we go. So I have one channel that's running the TD3 directly through it, and then I'm actually also running all the audio processing, which comes from the Make Noise, also through their own stereo channels. So I have kind of this control, and then I can also in a different version of this where it's less about queuing tapes, I could also then record my sets to tape, because I've been kind of thinking about how I want to distribute my music moving forward. And tape players are kind of having a renaissance right now, and
Yeah.
so I'm thinking as a way to create something that's more special and go back to a physical thing. I mean, I've wanted to do vinyl for a while, but vinyl's very expensive and it's big and it's bulky. But tapes could be kind of much easier because they are so much more compact and easy to kind of like travel around and hand out to people at shows and that kind of thing. So yeah, I can record with it. I can play samples with it. I'm getting into the possibility of maybe also making tape loops where you splice tape. And then you can do cool like analog delays with tape loops. So
Yeah.
there's a lot of creative uses for a tape machine.
Yeah. And or even just running the signal and in and then back to the DAW. It's the way to you can add the dirt or whatever you want to have this analog feel. Did I lose you again? All right, so Ollie Pitcher has a couple of questions. So what we're gonna do is, when I get you guys, you see how it's happening. It's happening live here. We gonna I have a question for you from the audience. So the first one, actually, Ollie has two questions. So one is, of course, great session. Thank you so much. Who are your favorite psy-trance artists?
Yeah, Fungus Funk is really, really good. I like a lot of what Infected Mushroom does.
Yeah.
Not some of it though, because they're very kind of can be like really good or like really Ozok Syndrome has been a good friend of mine for a long time, does great music. Yeah, I mean, there's so many, but typically the style that I like, it's got to have just amazing high-powered kick and bass. It also needs to have really good psychedelic elements. And then I also like to have fun with it. Like one of the things that I like to do when I'm just doing like remixes is I'll sample like classic 70s rock music, like AC/DC, that kind of thing. And I'll like layer it in with my psytrance too, just to kind of mess with people and have fun
Love it.
with it.
I did not know Fungus Funk, but I really like the name, so I'll go check them out for sure.
Oh, super good, super good.
Yeah, this is cool. All right, Ali has another question. What synths, virtual instrument were you using in your production before you started exploring Modular? Were you able to get similar results out of any of them?
Great question. Yeah, I probably have bought more plugins than I care to admit because sometimes I forget what I even own. But Serum, obviously, Silent, all kind of the classic heavy hitters. Omnisphere for more organic sounds. But I'll tell you, was I able to get the sound that I really wanted out of them? No, I really wasn't. And then it was something that actually frustrated me for a long time. I feel like I really had such a breakthrough when I switched over into the modular environment. And part of that is technical and some of the uniqueness of the modules. But part of it was also I realized how I thought about sound design in the DAW versus how I began to think about sound design once I got into modular. So I think I could maybe now go back into software and get actually better results because I've grown so much as a sound designer. But I would still say that I've never been as happy with the sound design, particularly the really psychedelic stuff, as I have been from what I've been able to get out of this kind of system.
Very cool, very cool. Well, Ollie, thank you so much for that question. Actually, for the two questions, the artistic and the technical one.
Yeah.
We're close to the end. I really appreciate you again coming back today, not just for the pre-recorded session, but also for giving us an opportunity to ask you a couple of questions live. To follow you, where should we go? How do people get in touch with you?
Yeah, just follow me on Instagram, Liam Shy, one word, or go to the website, liamshy.com. I've got courses up. I've got sample packs up. I've got a modular acid sample pack that I just released for $10. It's all recordings from my analog modular acid machine. So yeah, right. Check that out.
Let's do the plug here, man. This is the website.
Yeah.
Liam Shy.
Yep, that's it. liamshy.com.
Look at this. Music producer intro course with Ableton Live. Let's go check this out. Of course, here, is that the shot from Coachella when you DJ?
Yeah, yes.
Boom.
Coachella.
Boom. And here it is. So make sure there's a bunch of stuff. This is one of the sample pack. So go check him out. Thank you so much for coming back to Music Expo. I mean, we were supposed to be in the room. We were not. We did this, remotely, but I appreciate it. It was great to have you. I remember, and what I love is totally different from the topic that you covered last year, completely different. If you don't know, Liam talk about prototyping. Is that correct?
Yeah. Correct.
Using Ableton Live with some really impactful advice for anyone to try to be as creative and productive as possible. So Liam, I wish you a great weekend. We stay in touch, and thank you for everything. And enjoy have a lovely weekend.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate it. Everybody take care. Thanks for joining. Thanks for supporting. Appreciate you guys.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.